Wrath of Zeus is one of Vietnam's premier roller coasters. Located at Vinwonders Phu Quoc, this Vekoma firestorm features an intense series of positives, with some negatives and laterals to boot. However, very few people have gotten the chance to ride it due to its remote location, so not many people realize this coaster is really intense with high doses of positive G-forces. But it's also one of Vekoma's rougher coasters. It might honestly be too intense. I recently had the opportunity to ride it. Since reviews for Zeus are almost non-existent, let's review Wrath of Zeus and see if it's too intense. Before its big revamp in 2020, Vinwonders Phu Quoc was a small local park consisting of family rides and a small water park. It's a fine park, but not exactly worth traveling for. But the Vinpearl chain wanted this park to draw more tourists, so they closed the original to terraform it into an entirely new theme park. But they needed a new signature attraction to further draw people in. Well, it just so happens Vinpearl has a Vekoma launch coaster sitting in storage. It was originally meant to go to a different Vinpearl land in Ho Chi Minh City, but that project never happened, so the coaster was just sitting in pieces near the Saigon River. So Vinpearl moved this coaster to the Phu Quoc location. This would be known as Wrath of Zeus. Wrath of Zeus is a Vekoma firestorm. The coaster stands 164 feet, 50 meters tall, with a top speed of 71 miles per hour or 110 kilometers per hour, and traverses 3,445 feet, 1,050 meters of track. This makes it Vietnam's tallest and fastest roller coaster. Wrath of Zeus has a sprawling twister layout that twists over and under, but the coaster has a smaller presence as it's tucked in its own corner of the park where you can only see the top hat and loop. It's the elements that does the talking, as it consists of forceful elements with tons of float. Despite this, very few people have gotten the chance to ride it. When I mean it's an obscure ride, I've only maybe seen like 5 reviews. One look at the coaster, it becomes pretty obvious that it's due to the location. Vinwonders is located in Phu Quoc, Vietnam, a remote Vietnamese island off the southwest coast of Cambodia in the Gulf of Thailand. Wait, really? Guess the Cambodians didn't want to be invaded by Vietnamese rice farmers again. This explains a lot. First of all, Vietnam is not known for coasters. It's really only this, Roaring Timbers, Dragon's Run, and Tilt of Thunder. This is not a location coaster enthusiasts typically flock to. Second of all, getting to this place is not the easiest. The surrounding mainland to the island is severely underdeveloped. I'm pretty sure it's still infested with US shell bombs and Viet Cong traps. So realistically, only an airplane is your option. But there's not a lot of direct international flights to Phu Quoc. You'll pretty much need to take several connecting flights to get here. But the only other coaster near here is Roaring Timbers on the other side of the island. So you'd need to put in a lot of effort just to ride 2 roller coasters. 4 if you do what I did and stop at one of Vietnam's larger cities first. The only reason I got to go was because I was on a Vietnam trip visiting family in Ho Chi Minh City. From there, I took a separate flight to Phu Quoc and then took a ride share to the park. Once inside the park, you have to trek to the back left to a dead-end area where Zeus is. I'm a little mixed on the presentation. The coaster is slightly themed to Zeus, so the station and queue is themed to an ancient Roman ruin. However, beyond the shaded areas, there's not a lot of props there besides stone ruins in the helix. It's fine though. The coaster does not need theming, although it does not fit in with Vinwonders' themed lands. Eagle Warrior has better theming than this. Also, aside from the cattle pins, the queue is unshaded, so you could easily burn up here, but this is the best spot to get footage of the coaster. That or the Ferris wheel. But the Vietnamese sun has not been kind to the track. The track is in desperate need of a repaint as the colors are faded and chipped away. Not just that, the coaster has quite the shuffle. Now, I've been told new gen Vekomas usually run glossy smooth, on par with an old school B&M invert. But for whatever reason, Wrath of Zeus vibrates quite noticeably in some of the valleys. We'll go more into that later. Luckily, you won't have to wait long. Vinwonders doesn't usually get the highest crowds, and while my visit was certainly on the busier side, it was still only a station wait. However, just because it's a short wait doesn't necessarily mean you won't wait a while. This is the first coaster I rode in Asia and my first taste of Asian operations. And you know what? Asian operations, because this is one of the worst run roller coasters I've ever seen. I don't blame the operators, I blame the policies. For one, they have one train, with the back car broken the day I was there. Now, I don't mean they were just running one train. Vinwonders doesn't even own a second train, so capacity was already poor to begin with. But they take so long to load and unload. This is primarily because they have to do each step one by one instead of streamlining it. First, they have to wait until the previous riders unload, grab their loose articles, and leave the platform. Then they have to count how many people are riding the next train. They do call out for single riders to fill empty seats. Then once the gates open, everyone has to place their items in cubbies before boarding. This is one of those rides where nothing can ride with you. These items are not just bags, but also items like phones, wallets, and even glasses, even if you have a strap. And that right there is the reason I don't have my own POV. Would have been nice to know that ahead of time. Yeah, I'm a little salty, but that's park policies for you. Plus, that's normal for Asia. They forbid it all the time. They don't use metal detectors, but if they catch anything with you on the coaster, they will make you put it away. Then once you sit and pull the restraints, the operators take another 3 minutes to check with a whole bunch of walking around before actually dispatching. So station to station ends up taking around 6 to 8 minutes. So getting a ton of re-rides becomes pretty difficult, especially since ride hours here are shorter than the park hours. Vinwonders is typically open from 9 to 7:30. However, Zeus, and the other rides here for that matter, only operate from 10 to 6. Now, it's not just re-riding that's difficult, but it's also getting footage as you have to wait a while for a train to run. For reference, I rode Vinwonders' massive Ferris wheel to get footage. Mind you, this Ferris wheel has a duration of around 15 minutes. You know how many times Zeus cycled when I was on the wheel? Twice. Just twice, which is really embarrassing. So a 3-train wait ended up taking over 20 minutes. Made worse was that the station was unorganized as so you didn't know what row people were waiting for. However, I don't think that's the norm, as I did go on the weekend after New Year's. Most days, it should be a walk-on. If you do have to wait a while, you are at least free to select any row you'd like. Though if you do go on a quiet day, you might run into an entirely different operational issue. I didn't experience this, but I heard from someone that Vinwonders will hold the train for more riders, to the point where they only dispatch once every 15 minutes. You heard that right. Good luck getting multiple re-rides, or even off-ride footage for that matter if that happens. But since there was no grouper, the station is a madhouse trying to figure out who's waiting in what row. The first time I saw this, I instantly got flashbacks to the time I rode Great American Scream Machine. It was that bad. And yes, you can see there are seats in the station to sit while you're waiting. I like both the front and back equally. Despite the operational challenges, I managed to get 5 rides, 3 in the front and 2 in the fourth car. Unfortunately, during my 2 days, the back car was blocked due to issues with the restraints, so the furthest I rode was in car 4. After putting your stuff away in the bins, you're greeted with Vekoma's vest restraints and overhead lap bar combo. These vests are snug, but they're comfortable, which leads to no head banging. Perfect for something like this. Cause geez, it would have majorly sucked if this thing had hard over the shoulder restraints. The ride begins with a right hand turn into the launch track, but you don't launch right away. Instead, you stop for a few moments waiting to start, but then a dinging sound plays, which is followed by the launch. This launch is extremely punchy. The initial yank forces your head back into the headrest, then the rest of the launch pulls you with some strong G's. This is a powerful magnetic launch, though I just wish this launch had more theming, primarily because Zeus sits directly next to this bland tan wall. That wall is used as a theming facade to mask the park from the outside world. The first element after this launch is an oddly shaped top hat. The pullout punches you with intense G forces before the ascent ejects you out with strong forces. However, the apex of this element has a set of harsh trim brakes. So harsh in fact that the train slows to a near crawl. It nearly acts as a sort of holding brake similar to Gotham City Escape. You could say this disrupts the pacing, but what these trims do is create 2 distinct bursts of airtime. I already mentioned the first burst, but the trim causes you to land back into your seat. Then once the trims release, a second burst occurs where you drop down due to the steep angle, which creates more ejector. I believe the reason the trims are here is due to the following turn. The moment you start to level out, you immediately turn right and continue turning into the 0G roll, and this low to the ground turn is very intense. The G's felt similar to that of I-305's first turn in that this turn is prolongated for seconds. I would start to gray out on this turn and into the roll. I was caught off guard how intense this turn was because I've heard new gen Vekomas weren't that intense. Aside from Let Coaster, which is extremely forceful, most new gen Vekomas aren't forceful and instead just fun re-rideable rides. Rides like Phoenix and Abysses lack strong positive G's and instead flow with manageable forces. So when this turn hits, it hits you in the head. This leads to Zeus's first inversion, a 0G roll. Compared to the first turn, this roll is not that intense as it lacks substantial whip. Instead, it hits perfect 0G as you float through this element. Plus, since you're still feeling the after effects of the first turn, this roll feels disorienting. Next is the vertical loop. This loop hits on the sustained Gs throughout this element. So traversing this loop, you maintain the forces throughout the element. Next is the most forceful element on Zeus, the Twisted Camelback. This airtime hill is ferocious as it throws you with both stronger sustained airtime and laterals. So while going through this hill, you get tossed not just up, but also to the side. This airtime hill hits harder than a US airstrike. This is one of the best airtime moments I've ever ridden. Next is a curving turn into a smaller drop. You come into the steep curve with powering speed, so you experience lighter sustained positives. Then the following drop contains more ejector airtime, so you switch between positives to negatives in an instant. And then there's this wicked head chopper with the Twisted Camelback as you dive under it. However, this is the first instance of roughness during the ride. As you traverse this curve, you'll notice a strong side-to-side vibration. It's not headache inducing, so you will be fine, but I cannot imagine this with over-the-shoulder restraints. Okay, you know exactly what I mean by that. It's spoiler alert, this will not be the last spot of roughness. Next is the third and final inversion, a corkscrew, but it honestly rides more like a 0G roll, not just because of how it's profiled, but also due to the forces. This corkscrew lacks the whip I'm used to on corkscrews. Instead, this inversion offers a ton of float throughout it as you get nice 0G. Next is two back-to-back overbanks. These overbanks honestly don't do too much aside from a little bit of positive Gs, but you do maintain the speed so the pacing isn't interrupted. However, the roughness is really bad in this section. During the overbank, the train violently rattles side to side, even more so than earlier. Thankfully, it doesn't hurt as the vest eliminate any headbanging, but this is jarring compared to other new-gen Vekomas as a lot of people won't be expecting this. This clearly has to be a maintenance issue, especially considering the dire need of a repaint. Not only is this rougher than similar models, but Zeus cycles far less trains. Given the year-round nature, you could say Zeus is being run into the ground, but given the abysmal ops, Zeus cycles maybe 7 trains an hour. That's not enough to wear down the track unless Vinwonders is lacking in upkeep. This part, paired with the intensity, could be headache-inducing for some, especially since the wheel seats or the back of each car had more of a rattle, so sit in the odd rows for a smoother ride. Next is an off-axis airtime hill. This airtime gives a decent floater pop of airtime. If you sit on the left, you'll get a stronger pop since you're lifted higher up than the right. Then there's a low turn to the right into a small wave turn. This low turn is enclosed in a tunnel, so the sense of speed is heightened. Then the forces are starting to fizzle, but you could sense some type of Gs. But this wave turn barely does anything. You'll only get the mildest of floater. It's simply too elongated to do anything substantial. Finally, you have one more low turn into the brakes, completing 3,445 feet, 1,050 meters of track. Wrath of Zeus has a complete layout with a blend of elements. It has plenty of negatives and a little bit of laterals, but it especially excels in positives as many elements would force riders back and even gray out. Though it oddly lacks a lot of whip, which goes hand in hand with positives. It would have complemented the Gs, but it's not a big deal. Really, the biggest issues are ones I already mentioned with the shitty operations and roughness. Seriously, if it's already this rattly at just 6 years old, it's about to have major problems down the line. It's ironic shakier than the nearby Roaring Timbers. Now, the operational issues extend beyond the slow dispatches. Because Vinwonders is a year-round park, Wrath of Zeus will have to go down periodically for yearly maintenance. However, they don't list this schedule in advance anywhere. Vinwonders is at least generous enough to announce it, except when they do, it's usually already closed for the next couple weeks. This is important because I kept getting screwed over from scheduled ride closures during my Vietnam trip. For reference, when I was in Vietnam, both Dragon's Run at Dragon Park and roller coaster at Dam Sen Park were closed for 2 to 3 weeks for scheduled maintenance. Now, I did not experience any rain while I was in Vietnam, but I'm going to assume based off other Asian parks that they don't run Wrath of Zeus or the other outdoor rides for that matter in any type of precipitation. So if you want the highest chance of riding any coaster in Vietnam, maybe don't go in like mid-January like I did. That's why I made the conscious choice to visit the weekend after New Year's. Yeah, it was certainly busier, but I at least got to ride it, especially since sometimes Zeus will close on quiet weekdays to rest according to some reviews. So overall, what would I rate Wrath of Zeus? I give it an 85 out of 100. The coaster has an amazing layout that's simple simply held back by how it's run. The layout is amazing with these intense elements that knock you up. Some of them really surprised me and made for a memorable experience, though I must warn the second half is significantly weaker than the first half. If they could run and maintain it better, it could easily be a 95, because as of right now, it could wear someone out fast, which leads to the question, is this coaster too intense? For me, no. Even though I hate marathoning intense coasters, Zeus has that intensity I like in a great coaster. However, rides like this, and especially Let Coaster, may suffer from the I-305 problem where it's simply too intense for its own good. Because with how intense those first few elements are, riders who experience way too many Gs will have to tap out much faster, leading to lower popularity. Though in fairness, this had the longest line at the park that day, so that probably wasn't an issue. But coasters that heavily focus on positives almost never get a long lines, or at least never the longest line there. And as I explained in several previous videos, rides with heavy G-forces causes the track to become rougher faster, which could explain why Zeus is already shuffling this soon. I do wonder how much more intense that layout and especially the first turn would be had the trim brakes not hit as hard. It's also why I believe this layout will stay original to Vietnam. When Vekoma makes a coaster, they typically like to clone those layouts to keep costs down. This is the stock firestorm layout, as this layout was also used for a clone in China that... Whoa, what the heck? That's the theme of the Chinese firestorm? Dang, now I'm actually sad it never opened and currently sits SPNL. But in 2023, Vekoma rebranded the firestorm as the Ghost Rider. This is evident as Vekoma uses images of Zeus for the Ghost Rider. This new layout, like the one going to Brazil, appears to be narrower, drawn out, and less intense. It should still be a great coaster, just a less intense one. How does this compare with other modern Vekomas? Okay, here's the thing. This is literally the only modern Vekoma thrill coaster I've ridden. Every other Vekoma I've ridden is either a family ride or an absolute shitbox. While those modern thrill ones appear to be more comfortable, they definitely don't have the forces of Zeus, aside from lack of course, which is why you should go to Vietnam to try this great coaster. It may be rougher than those other Vekomas, but it's definitely more forceful too. I am aware Southeast Asia isn't the most popular or accessible place for coaster enthusiasts, but this and Roaring Timbers make going to Phu Quoc area worth it, as those are easily the two best roller coasters in Vietnam. Though I do wonder how Tilt of Thunder will compare to these two. Just be aware you might have a few hurdles riding it, and please get a repaint. You look like you're only 2 bottles away from an overdose. So that is my review of Wrath of Zeus at Vinwonders. Would you be down to try this, and would this compete with any other launch coasters for you? Leave all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, which you've committed to watch this far, so please leave a like. Also, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. That way, it convinces the YouTube algorithm to spread this video to more viewers. Finally, watch more bangers you see here. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.